Diesel tuning, one of the best ways to increase performance, fuel mileage, and horsepower. But what is the most unreliable and reliable diesel tune you can put on your truck? Well, that is what we are going to be asking this diesel tuning CEO today in this video. What really makes a tune unreliable or reliable? We will cover these 6 questions. How does diesel tuning work? What makes a tune good or bad? What is the most common mistake DIYers make when tuning their vehicle? Is it getting harder to tune vehicles with the modern emissions laws and regulations? What is the most unreliable diesel tune overall? And what are some things that you should not do when you're tuned? Today we are inside of Gearhead Tuning. We are actually doing an interview with Matt here. He is the CEO and owner of Gearhead Tuning here. If you guys need diesel tuning, they can take care of you here, or tuning in general, they can take care of you here at Gearhead. That being said though, we're gonna jump right into it. So Matt, I wanted to start off with a pretty general question. How does tuning in general work for the average person? Like if they want to come in and get it tuned, how does it work?
I mean, generally speaking, you have a device. There's several different brands. You're modifying the same software. So whatever the tuner's preferred brand is what gets used. You're taking the factory calibration, making modifications to certain tables and other parameters, routing it back to the truck, which alters the way the vehicle runs.
How do y'all guys tune it to make sure that the vehicle stays reliable as well, like down the road?
You know, it really varies on things like the rest of the truck. I mean, you can make lots of power, but will the transmission handle it?
Yeah.
Well, in the calibration on most modern vehicles, you actually tune the transmission at the same time. So that allows it to actually take the extra power and actually have the right amount of clamping force, right hydraulic pressures, things of that nature. It makes it actually handle the power, so you do have a reliable package. And on diesel trucks especially, you have to watch EGTs. So if you have a pyrometer, it's preferred to be before the turbocharger. You typically don't want to see high temperatures above 1200 to 1250 degrees long term. Towing situations, they can run high or whatever. Basically, that's thermal stress on the engine. So if you go too long, too hot, it can actually cause stress cracks on the pistons or other failures.
And what makes a tune good or bad?
Well, it all depends on the tuner actually.
Yeah.
The person writing the calibration, you really have to take into consideration, like I said, the transmission tuning that goes with it. Make sure you're not making more power. The transmission can handle all, everything being considered. You want to make sure that it's a complete tune from front to back. Obviously, bad manners. You don't want to start bad when it's cold. Diesel trucks have enough problems as it is when it's cold. Yeah. You don't want to actually add to that. So
how do y'all guys kind of work around that? Like if it's 15 degrees outside like it was this morning, how do y'all write tunes to make it start better in the cold?
We don't try to reinvent the wheel.
Gotcha.
The factory did a really good job developing a calibration. And I mean, they take the things up to Alaska, make sure they start and that kind of thing. So if you stay within kind of the confines of the factory methodology of the program, you're not going to have any problems. But there's some tuners that maybe just don't have so much experience, or they try to what I call reinvent the wheel. And what will happen is they will zero out tables or do other things that affect the drivability of the vehicle when it's warming up and things of that nature. And just I don't do that personally. So, and that also plays into emissions and things like that.
I kind of got my tuning from out of state or out of country, but what do you see like the most problems with DIYers when they bring their truck in here? Like what do you see as the most problems, or the most common problem, I guess you could say, with somebody trying to tune their own vehicle?
Well, I wouldn't say tuning more than just mismatched parts. I mean, you can't have a 200 horse injector with a stock turbo, for example. Yeah. You don't want to do that. Every time you gain something, you lose something somewhere else typically. So, bigger turbo, your turbo's too big. Oh, I want to tow 15 to 18,000 pounds with my truck. Well, you're not going to put a non-VGT turbo on it, for example, that's on a 6-liter. It's not going to work right. Plus, obviously, non-VGT has problems in other areas as well. But you just want a well-matched combo, and sometimes people go too big on the injector, too big on the turbo. You need to set your goals before doing any modification. Say, hey, you know what? I would like to have a reliable 450 horsepower or 550 horsepower truck. What am I giving up to get there? And so a lot of people don't think about the ramifications of their modifications because they don't worry about what they're going to lose. And oh, well, now I can't tow. Well, this truck tows my boat every summer, or it's going to tow my camper to the campgrounds. Now I've made a truck that can't tow. So what good is that?
Yeah.
So just considering your modifications before you take the plunge, that's where people make big mistakes.
What do you recommend for modification wise? Like, should I put a turbo on before I put injectors in, or should I do injectors after turbo? What do you kind of like timeline wise should I do on modifications?
Honestly, I would look at downstream first, like transmission mods, torque converter, stuff like that. Because even on, say for example, on a stock 6.0, the transmissions can hold quite a bit of power. You start having converter issues when you start putting bigger injectors and whatnot. But always think about the rest of the drivetrain first, and then start looking at mods. So honestly, if it's a VGT turbo, not too big, you can run them with stock injectors. Yeah. So you can run like a stage 2 turbo, has no problem with stock injectors. We've actually done some emissions tests where it works great. Actually has better emissions up top in some cases. But just make sure sure that the amount of fuel, especially on a diesel, the amount of fuel you're putting in, you have enough turbo. Otherwise, you're giving up something. So the larger nozzle you go, obviously more smoke potential, the bigger the nozzle you go. But also a bigger nozzle hurts turbo spool because you have reduced your injector duration. So the injector duration is how long it takes to get X amount of fuel in. So if you need, say, a teaspoon of fuel for this particular RPM range or engine load, it can only give you a tablespoon reliably. But what that does is it shortens the injector pulse width so much that you lose turbo drive. So it can actually make it laggier, all else equal, by having an injector nozzle is too big.
Is that kind of what y'all perfect in the tuning as well whenever somebody does that?
You can't tune around a mechanical combination. Gotcha. It's just not right. So it's just better to have a properly matched combination to begin with, and then everything just works right.
So they got to get it right off the rip before y'all touch it, or like.
Well, no, we try. I mean, we don't sell parts that do things like that. So, you know, we try to, for example, let's just say that you put a 200% nozzle on a stock turbo truck.
Yeah.
It's going to be smoky, it's going to be hot, it's going to run like crap. And actually, we, in the tuning for bigger nozzles, we actually pull fuel out to try to clean it up as much as possible. But, you know, there's an old saying, you can't polish a turd.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you have in that situation. So you just don't want to have a really bad combination, have to tune around it.
Gotcha. What is kind of the most unreliable tune that you can run on your diesel truck, or even kind of vice versa, unreliable and reliable?
Honestly, reliability is the complete thought process that went into the tuning and the combination of parts. A bad tune is one that, you know, makes lots of smoke, gets really hot, doesn't shift well, doesn't hold the power well, the transmission. Just, there's lots of ways to screw it up. When it's right, it's right. When it's wrong, it could, you know, it's like a cut with 1,000 knives. You know, it's just little cuts with 1,000 knives still make for a bad experience.
Yeah. I kind of want to relate to my viewers a little bit. Let's say I have for myself, a 6.0 Powerstroke. I'm running the SET X4 that y'all guys sell here. What kind of tuning do you guys put on that to make sure that it isn't as smoky and it runs better and gives more horsepower and just a better performing truck? What do y'all kind of do here for that?
Well, honestly, it's all about the development that went into the calibration. So,
gotcha.
I mean, not only dyno tuning, but, you know, tuning on the road, make sure it's shifting at the right time and everything else. And
no, I have to say, after I got your guys' tuning, my truck, I mean, it shifted like night and day difference. When I had the Mini Max on my 6.0, and it was terrible. Like, it would shift like shit all the time. And then when I got your guys' tuning, it was like butter. Like, everything was perfect. So what are some things, for somebody who might have tuned their vehicle already, what are some things that you should and shouldn't do when you're tuned on a diesel truck or any truck in general?
Don't overpower the truck. Okay, what do I mean by that? You can have a 500 horsepower truck, but if the truck came from the factory with 200 horsepower, probably need to think about everything else in that drivetrain that's affected by that extra horsepower. You got U-joints, you got gears, you got bearings, all this other stuff. So just because you can make 500 horsepower and run the quarter mile doesn't mean you should be towing with that much power in some cases. Obviously, you have EGTs to worry about. Don't overheat the exhaust temperature. You've got other drivetrain parts that are taking the brunt of that load, and so you've doubled the horsepower and you're towing with it. You know, maybe you need to check those U-joints, make sure you got grease in them, make sure that you're keeping up better maintenance, maybe, you know, synthetic fluids, you know, that kind of thing. Just think of the whole truck after you've been tuned to make sure you're not neglecting some part or overstressing some part.
Kind of switching gears more towards my last question, and this is kind of one that everybody wants to know about, is it getting harder with the modern emissions to tune these trucks, especially with everything being so confined to the EPA regulating everything? Is it harder to tune these trucks?
I wouldn't say it's harder. If you understand the factory methodology and how everything works, the biggest thing on the newer emissions trucks, especially with the DPF, you just can't make soot. Because if you're loading the DPF with soot and then having to go on a regen every 10 miles, I mean, what good is that? Basically, you're going to use even more fuel. And then plus, obviously, that wouldn't pass emissions anyway because you're using more fuel that would show up in emissions tests. So it's been more of a having to understand things better, how things work. I'll say the last 10 years, I've probably still learned, even on the 6 liter. I mean, the 6 liters hasn't been produced since what, 2007?
Yeah, 2007.
So we started tuning in 2007, 2008 timeframe. Yeah, I've had to revamp my tunes because A, they're cleaner and get better mileage now. It's just, you know, the more I learned, the more my process of tuning changed to be able to, you know, A, follow that factory methodology, and B, give it just a really good driving experience for the customer.
Yeah, so y'all have been tunings before the regulations too, because I knew 2018 they hit pretty hard, so y'all kind of had a lot of lawsuits there.
Yeah, EPA's not playing around anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, they're giving felonies now, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a game anymore. It's just you cannot delete trucks. Period.
Yeah,
that's the biggest no-no. But on top of that, you know, EPA comes in and visits. They want to see that you're actually doing testing. I mean, I've got my own 5-gas analyzer. It puts stuff on the dyno. We do before and after testing. So thing is, and we're going to go for some CARB certifications really soon.
And what's that?
Okay, CARB. CARB is the California Air Resources Board. They're their own state agency, but the EPA has allowed, if you pass CARB, to not basically be prosecuted. So if you have a CARB compliant tune, in the EPA's eyes, you're doing just fine.
Yeah.
So, and actually it's harder in some ways to pass the EPA standards than it is the California standards. A lot of people don't realize that. So EPA actually wants you to test like product durability, like, you know, make sure that you're not hurting the emissions for 100,000 miles, stuff like that. Where California says, hey, I want a before and after test. Are you hurting emissions?
Yeah.
And if not, you go through the FTP 75 or USO6 drive cycle, you're good.
So if you're good in California, you're pretty much good. And everyone.
Yeah, you know, a California compliant tune is a defense to prosecution by the EPA.
Wow. So you got to be straight over there if you're going to sell tunes, right?
It's a changing field, and you either adapt or you stop tuning. That's really what it amounts to. And, you know, we made a decision early on that we don't want to, you know, get our doors kicked in, and, you know, there's lots of money to be made doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing. It's one of those things. It's a juice worth the squeeze.
Yeah, exactly. So is that what you say is kind of the hardest part about tuning, is the regulations?
No, it's more understanding the platform. I mean, even so, the 6.7 Powerstroke, for example, they changed some stuff in 2015 that's different than the 2014 and earlier. At least even like the Turbo VGT, the way it actually commands Turbo VGT. There's some stuff in there, and, you know, we're at the mercy of what the companies like SCT and HP Tuners and others can reverse engineer to give us access to certain stuff. And there's still some stuff that hasn't been defined yet. It's one of those things that you don't know you need it until you need it.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. We're looking at some issues right now on the 6.7 where it's we're going to get into that market soon, and just they changed some things in 2015. It's like, oh wow, okay, that's different, you know. So it's not just a component change, but the way the control system happens to actually change some stuff as well. So
gotcha.
I like a challenge, but it's just one of those things that you just have to adapt to it, and you have to have the stomach for it, and you have to be like, you know, get your butt kicked, you know, 5 times, on the 6th time it works. Like, oh, okay, wow.
Gotcha.
And then honestly, it is trial and error. I mean, you follow the factory methodology, you understand what it does, but you still have to, you know, proof is on the dyno and on the street, and the emissions output. Just, you know, it all has to work together to make a package.
Gotcha. Well, thanks, Matt. Yeah, that's all I want to ask you today. If you guys want to bring your truck in and get it tuned here at Gearhead, you guys can give them a call. I'll leave all their information in the description down below. Thank you guys for watching, and catch you on the next one.